is July 1, 1981. It is 23 hours. We are at 8763 Wonderland Drive. Moving cars in front of the location. Looking in a northwesterly direction towards the entrance, a 3-level single-family residence.
(1981). There was a mass, I guess you call them, FBI is calling them mass murders now. There were 5 victims, 4 of which were murdered. One actually survived in a residential hills in the West Hollywood area. And that house was known to be a dope house where there was a lot of dope dealing going on. Some organized crime that the dealers there were working with. They were also known to be frequented by celebrities who were buying narcotics there. One of them was a former porn actor by the name of John Holmes. There were a number of other people, some rock and roll singers of the age that back then in the 70s and 80s would score there. But what had happened is that at about 4 p.m. on July 1st of 81, there was a neighbor to 8763 who was moving out, and they looked over at the house. It was only like 12 feet across the property line. Noticed the door was ajar. And they'd been moving these people out for some time, and one of the people helping with the moving just happened to stick his head in because he thought he'd heard moaning or something coming from this open door that had been open for all of these hours. He looked inside and he saw a body. A young woman named Barbara Richardson was lying on the ground near a sofa, just as you look in and off to the left, and she was bloodied up pretty bad. Obviously, her head had been smashed in. Of course, he called the police. In fact, his name was Bruce Fisher. He called the police and reported it. And police showed up, and they went in, and they didn't know what they had, so they cleared the house. And when they did, they found 4 additional bodies, 2 downstairs and 2 more upstairs. And they found one of the young women downstairs, Susie Launius is her name, was still alive, but she wasn't expected to make it. Initial observations were that the 5 victims had been attacked with pipes or some type of a club weapon, but we found out eventually with the striation marks in the walls and in the skulls of some of the victims that there were striations indicating some type of a pipe was used, or pipes. Investigations showed that there was probably at least 4, maybe 5 suspects because of the bodies were spread throughout the house. When I first got there, I got there a couple hours later. It was probably 6:30. It was still light. And we had, like I said, 4 bodies now. Susie Launius had been removed to Cedars-Sinai, where they were working on her. It looked like she would die from loss of blood, but miraculously she survived. Come to find out, the people that lived there were involved in narcotics deals and robbery. They were ripping off narcotics dealers. They were users themselves. And there were some involvement with local organized crime figures who were also involved in selling narcotics. This case went on for some 20 years. There were a lot of ins and outs and a lot of corruption, government corruption, people being bought off. this is what we found as we went through the investigation. Looking into this case, and 2 days after this happened, we were trying to put things together in the office. We had just identified the 5 victims, and they were identified as having previous narcotics records, robbery records. One of the victims, ironically enough, was suspected in the murder for hire of a guy by the name of Vic Weiss, who was a former sports writer. And his body was found at Universal City in his car, murdered. And one of our victims, the name of Ron Launius, was actually a suspect in that murder. We find out that Ron Launius was also a suspect, now a victim, who was involved in several murders for hire. So these weren't a real nice bunch of folks. And somebody obviously got pissed off at him because it was up close and personal. All of them skulls had been beaten severely with, as like I said, we found out to be pipes. During the second day, we got an anonymous call initially, but this fella called me in the office, and we hadn't slept in a couple of days. In fact, we were at the crime scene for something like 30 hours. Because you don't want to touch anything at a crime scene. And this was July 1st. It was very warm. All the windows were closed. The bodies were still there. We had flies we were getting coming in with a stench and everything else, but things that you can't move things at a crime scene until you recorded them with still photography, basically, which was one reason that led me to talked to one of the videographers who showed up, who was taking short non-action type photos of the victims, which you do at a crime scene, obviously. The victims they're part of the evidence, and there's a lot of evidence in the scene of blood. So we had 8 print people printing the place. We had criminalists there who were tracking the blood. Now, this is before DNA, which is something important to keep in mind. And the coroner's office would show up and, like I said earlier, doing an independent investigation on their own. So we had bodies in 2 different locations, one in the front, 2 in the rear of the first level, 2 in the rear of the first level, 1 in bed. And upstairs, we had 2 more victims, one in a sitting position at the foot of the bed, and 1 lying half on and half off the bed. So we had victims in 3 different rooms. The place had been tossed. Obviously, whoever did this also tossed the house, looking for probably drugs, looking for weapons, maybe. But it was a dope house, and so they tore the place completely apart. Later on, we discovered that the murders occurred about 4 a.m., and during 4 a.m. and 4 p.m., the house was also visited by at least 2 groups of thugs that were associated with the victims who went by to score, found the victims, and instead of calling the cops or an ambulance or anything else, they went through the house and helped themselves, which completely screwed up the crime scene. So we had that. So I'm looking at all of this, and with a videographer there, it made sense. Why don't we just go ahead and we'll take the regular shots, the singles of all the victims and everything. I'll do that the way we normally do. At a crime scene like this, it will take hours. But perhaps we can encapsulate the whole crime scene by doing one video. So I decided we'd do a video. So this happens that this particular video I took was about 25 minutes, I think. And it encapsulated the entire crime scene. And I'm glad to this day I did it. Turns out it was the first time a murder video had been admitted into evidence in a murder case in the state of California. So we broke some ground with that, but it was very effective. And this would be effective in that it showed jurors just exactly what happened. You can describe a bloody crime scene, but until you see it on videotape, it really doesn't sink in. And these victims were bashed several times. And so this was obviously in our mind initially not just about narcotics, but something up close and personal. Now, as I'd said, Susie Launius survived this, but of course later she didn't recall anything. In fact, the irony with her injuries was that her skull was crushed in such a manner that it cut off the bleeding. All the others bled out. But she lived because of her injuries to some degree. And she's still alive today. But the four others, like I said, their skulls were crushed in a severe beating. One thing led us to another, and 2 days later, we got a call. Well, like I said, this man said that he knew somebody who was associated with the people who lived there, and that he knew all of them, and that his girlfriend was there also. And he said to this individual who called us by the name, his nickname is Fat Howard. His real name is Leslie Cook. Come to find out, he was a local receiver of stolen property that worked with a lot of dope dealers because he moved stolen property, and he dealt with these people and organized crime, had been for some time. But he says he knew this person by the name of David Lind. His girlfriend was there, and he assumed his girlfriend was the one who lived, the girl by the name of Barbara Richardson. But she wasn't. She was the one that was killed, and the other one was Ron Launius' wife who lived. Anyhow, he was under the influence, as David Lind was, and went to the location with Fat Howard and broke into it was still a guarded crime scene with tape on it. It's a crime, it's a felony to cross into the crime scene and force you entry into a crime scene, because it was still, we were going to return to a crime scene. Worked a lot of murders, and I've never worked a murder where I was only there once. You visit, revisit, and visit again, especially a crime scene of that magnitude. So we knew we were coming back, and we had secured the house and put tape all over it. Well, David Lind tore the tape down, broke into the house, and was rummaging through the house. For what? Nobody knew. Eventually for narcotics. So this guy, Fat Howard, who was with David, called us, and he caught me at my desk. And he says, yeah, I got someone who has some information for you. And I said, okay. And I said, who are you? He said, well, I'm Fat Howard. I said, I need better than Fat Howard. What's your real name? So he said who he was. And I said, where are you now? He says, I'm at the house. I said, okay, where do you live? He says, no, I'm at the other house. What house is that? I said, where the murders happened. He said, what do you mean you're at the house? The house is secured. He says, no, I'm not. Well, I'm out front, but my friend's inside. I said, inside the house? And he says, yeah. I said, you stay right where you are. We're on our way. So I grabbed my partner and the lieutenant, and we flew up to the Wonderland house. And we pulled up in front, and Fat Howard was just that. He's a big man. He was waiting for us outside. Luckily, a black and white police car who had been patrolling the area pulled by, because he was checking the place for us from time to time, make sure nobody was in there. Of course, there was. So we stopped them, and they held Howard there, and they ran him. And we went up, and we heard all this ruckus inside. And we went in the living room, and there was this guy on all fours picking up a lot of narcotics that was lying all over the floor, pills and tablets and stuff in his pocket. He was obviously a biker type. He looked like a biker, and he was. It was David Lind was his name. Well, David Lind turned out to be the key to the entire case. And again, this is a little lesson on how to treat and not treat certain people when you don't know the role that they may have played in these cases. So we treated him decently, but, he was at the time, he's on his hands and knees, and he committed a felony, so we had drew down on him, shaken him down, cuffed him up, and took him out. But we started talking to him, and he started opening up about everybody at the location who was killed. We took him down to the station, and we interviewed him. And while he was there, he was popping pills. Normally, he would stop that type of thing, except you have to make a decision here. Do we let him continue on? Because as he's popping pills, he's also giving out names, information. He's giving us a suspect, how these things happen, why these things happen. So we let them talk. Sometimes you can't be conventional the way you handle these types of things. This would be one of those times. He was more interested in his girlfriend, who was Barbara Richardson. He assumed that Barbara was at Cedars-Sinai and it was the victim that lived. He was a biker type in his 40s at the time who had spent more time in prison than on the street for robbery, for narcotics dealing, burglary, theft, anything but murder we found on his rap sheet. He's a gangbanger from Sacramento. Bob Sousa, my partner, was also from Sacramento. You use these types of things when you find out about them. Now, we could hard ask somebody like this and threaten them it's going to go nowhere and you're not going to get anything. So you be honest with these people. I looked at him and I said, David, Barbara's dead. Say it, get it out there, get it over with. Number one, we're being honest with them. We're not playing games with them. We're not holding back on them. He blew up. He grabbed his chair, threw it against the wall. He's screaming and hollering. He's under the influence of this, that, and the other. My lieutenant jumped up. He wasn't after us because we're all of a sudden, we're the only one talking to him. So he settled down. And I said, we're going to be honest with you. You honest with us. We're going to get to the bottom of this. We're going to find out who killed Barbara. We didn't mention anything else, not his involvement or anything else. And he said, we need you as a witness. You're going to give us a lot of information. We're going to give you back information. So he told us how this was set up. He mentions a porn actor by the name of John Holmes, which to the younger generation was a very well-known pornographic actor back in the, 70s and 80s, maybe even back to the 60s. Very well known. He was also a user, mainly cocaine. And he was a customer of the group there at the Wonderland Gang at their house. There was also another guy involved, an organized crime figure by the name of Ed Nash. Ed Nash was one of the largest dope distributors in Southern California. He was also a very wealthy man who owned 9 different nightclubs and had all sorts of organized crime connections to the Armenian mafia, the Israeli mafia, and he was a Palestinian. Interesting story there, obviously. He came in the 50s to LA and opened a hot dog stand. One thing led to another, and he got into narcotics and became a very wealthy and involved dealer in doing that. He'd been arrested several times. So David Lind was implicating him in the murders. He says that what happened was that the Wonderland Gang was hooking up with John Holmes, who mentioned to the Wonderland Gang that he knew this organized crime figure who had a lot of money and a lot of narcotics, who lived up in a house in Studio City on the Donalola Place, about 2 miles as a crow flies from the Laurel Canyon house. All he had to do was go out to Laurel Canyon, which is a very well-known through street in the Los Angeles area. And he lived on Donalola, just off of Laurel Canyon, maybe 10, 12 minutes away by car if you would drive over the Mulholland Drive and down into Studio City. And John Holmes told the folks at Wonderland that they could rip this guy off really easy.
There was a plan made in which John Holmes would go over to that house and leave a door unlocked. Is that correct?
That was the plan from the beginning. It never changed.
And so they set a scenario up where John Holmes would go up and make a buy at this organized crime's home, Ed Nash's home, and he'd leave the rear slider door open. And for them to come up there at a certain time, early in the morning, well, everybody who was in the house would probably be crashed on dope or sleeping, and they could enter through the rear and go into Ed Nash's house and take him down. Well, they decided they would do that. So 4 of these people, the suspects, armed, these are badasses. They didn't do things by intimidating. They did things by shooting people and beating their brains in. Ironically, that they should end up the same way, but that's another story. So they went up there, 4 of them. They had a stolen car, which they had a wheelman by the name of Tracy McCourt. He was parked the stolen car out front down a little house, while 3 suspects went in with guns. And the 3 suspects were David Lind was one of them. They went in the back and they robbed Ed Nash, the organized crime figure. They not only robbed him, they humiliated him. He was a hot-headed Palestinian that had a lot of power as an organized crime figure, owned cops, owned juries, owned judges. So they weren't screwing with an amateur. But they didn't care because they were under the influence and they were going to rip off Ed Nash. They had him on his knees. They put a barrel down his throat. They threatened him. He finally gave up a safe and about $100,000 in cash with a lot of narcotics and some antique weapons, some rifles. They shot his bodyguard, a guy by the name of Gregory Diles. It was a grazing wound. Greg Diles weighed 300 pounds. He was a bodyguard for Ed Nash. And they left everybody tied and they took off with all the loot, the money, the guns, the dope, back to Wonderland. Holmes had left and met them back at Wonderland. He was part of getting the cut, but he'd set all this up. It was a big mistake on John Holmes' part. Holmes took his cut along with Tracy McCourt. They got half cuts. And the other guys, the Deverell and his girlfriend, and Launius and his girlfriend Richardson, and Holmes and the others started to party with all this stuff. Launius had to leave because he had a court date in Sacramento, so he splits earlier and the next day. Ed Nash is no dummy, the organized crime figure. He figures this out without going into a story that'll take 30 minutes. He knows that Holmes is involved and was set up by Holmes so that these crooks could come in there and rip him off of his dope. The last thing an organized crime dope dealer is going to do is call the cops if he gets robbed. It didn't happen that way. For obvious reasons, he's not going to report this. The people who ripped him off knew that. But there is such a thing as retribution. And Ed Nash was going to have it. Ed Nash beats it out. Ed Nash and Greg Diles, the bodyguard, beat the truth out of John Holmes. They tied him to a chair and beat the hell out of him until he admitted to them that he had set this thing up, left the sliding glass door open in the rear.
I heard Mr. Nash threatening Mr. Holmes, telling Mr. Holmes that he would have every member in his family killed. And John was begging for his life. I heard furniture being, like a body being knocked around on walls.
Did you hear Mr. Nash order Mr. Diles to do something else at that time?
Yes, he ordered Mr. Diles to take Mr. Holmes up the street to Wonderland Avenue to get back his drugs and money.
Let these guys in to rob and humiliate Nash. Ed Nash is livid. He's going to do something about this. So he sets it up. He wants his stuff back, but he also wants retribution. He wants them to pay. Because when this gets out in that community, he's going to lose credibility, not to mention a lot of money and dope and prestige and everything else. He's going to get even. So he wants everybody in that house taken out. So he tells John Holmes, he says, you're going to work this out with me. If you don't, you're going to have a problem. July 1st, you're going to be back in the house. I want you to, there'll be a knock on the door about 4 a.m. There'll be some people there. And I want you to let them in. Now, the Wonderland house has a stairway going up to the entrance, but it has a gate, a locked gate in the front before you get to the front door. So Holmes is terrified. He says, all right, he'll leave the gate open and he'll wait to hear the knock on the door on that morning. And then he was told that you just do what you're told to do. Holmes says, fine. July 1st comes, there's a knock on the door at 4 a.m. John Holmes, knowing full well that these are the killers, whoever they are, they're going to come in and they're going to do their job, and I'm going to stay out of their way. Hopefully, I'm not going to end up like them. So he lets them in. And at least 4. I believe that probably ends up to be the number, but there might have been a getaway driver, but 4 entered, and they're all armed with pipes. They enter the house, and they proceed to go from one room to the other and beating in the brains of everybody that's in the house, and there are 5 people in there. They first go to the front room where Barbara Richardson is sleeping on a sofa, and they beat her right off the coach sofa right onto the floor and continue to beat her. There's blood tailing up the side of the wall where whoever was holding a weapon would flip it back and come down on her skull. Back in the rear bedroom, Susie and Launius is in bed. When they attack him, he's blasted on coke. He's out. His head was just crushed in as he lay there. Susie Launius is beaten off the bed and on the floor. She's continuously beaten there. Then they go upstairs and they get Billy Deverell and his girlfriend at the time, beat them senseless. She was lying half on the bed, half off the bed, with her head beaten so much her head is actually flat. You can't tell it's a human head when the eye is up. He's beaten as he goes for them. He fights back. He's actually got some defensive wounds. But they beat him to death, and they take off. But before they leave, they sack the house. They go through, they grab any narcotics that they can find. They take money, weapons, and they leave through the front door. Now, what I believe happened, and there's some evidence of this, that before they leave, they say, okay, Holmes, you're going to take a few whacks on Ron Launius with this pipe, or you're going to end up being number 6. So I believe that Holmes says, fine. Now, John Holmes and Ron Launius hated one another. Ron Launius would never allow John Holmes into his room because he thought he was a chicken shit for every reason you can imagine and a porn actor, and hated him. Holmes was terrified of Launius, who was a killer, a known killer. He wouldn't ever go in Launius's room. He was terrified of him. So he either agreed to take a couple of whacks on the already dead body of Launius, or that was someone else's decision. Regardless, John Holmes's left palm print is on the railing on the bed above the head of Ron Launius, inches from his head, as if someone would brace themselves on the bed because it was a narrow way to get in there. You had to crawl between a nightstand and the bed sideways, holding on to the railing and beating down on Launius's head. That would be how that palm print was found. So that's what I believe. We believe he took a shot at them and the killers left. He leaves right after Holmes did. Later we find out Holmes's wife tells us that he showed up at her house. He was estranged from. He shows up all bloody, with blood all over him. She refuses to testify, which she couldn't do. We couldn't get her to testify. They were still legally married. That's another story. Bottom line is Holmes is eventually filed on for murder. We're looking for him, and I find him down in Florida. So we go down in Florida, and one thing leads to another. And I find him down in a hotel where he's changed his appearance, his name, and everything else. And I arrest him in Florida. We bring him back here after we got a warrant for him. And we file murder charges on him for the reasons already stated. We kind of thought he would roll over and didn't do it. He's acquitted eventually. For whatever reasons you can get into, maybe they felt sorry for him, acquitted to his lawyers. He too was a victim who was terrified. So that's why he did whatever he happened to was accused of doing. he was acquitted. And that went on for a certain period of time. Meanwhile, the search goes on, and we arrest Greg Diles for the murders and Ed Nash for the murders. Now, skipping around, this goes over a period of years. Other evidence becomes made known. There's another murder that occurs at Nash's house. We investigate. It was one of Ned Nash's employees who he has killed. He had him hot-shotted with dope and said it was a natural. So little things like this are popping up, getting involved in the investigation. The feds get involved. Federal agent came to us and said that he was part of a federal indictment that indicted Ed Nash and others for federal crimes. He wanted to know all about our investigation. We said, we don't do those things. We can't tell you about our investigation. We're still doing it anyway. Upsetting him because he was part of this federal organized crime federal task force, which was working the LA area and working Ed Nash, a couple of guys by the name of the Medeiros brothers, and 20 some odd other people for organized crime activities in LA, which included murder, narcotics dealings, and everything else, implicating Ed Nash. So we have the separate investigations on Nash. Federal informants get involved. One of them comes to us. He's in the lockup in San Diego, gives us information. But he's also a federal informant operating for them at a different level. There are different things that are complicating this case as we go along. Unbeknownst to us, the one federal agent who's in charge, as part of the organized crime strike force, goes to our chief of police and says, Tom Lange, and Bob Souza, who's my partner, are in bed with organized crime. They're covering for Ed Nash, this organized crime, who committed these murders. I can prove that because I have informants that says that. It's all bullshit. We're not an organized crime. It's what organized crime does. Come to find out that he himself, his name is Henry Hoskins. Henry Hoskins was a federal agent with the Organized Crime Strike Bureau who himself was in bed with organized crime. And he went to our department to lay it off on us, to try to set us up, to take everybody's mind off what was going on, to make everything we did from here on out discoverable, which means anything we do has to be turned over to the defense. This leads to Ed Nash actually approaching us and offering us $500,000 to forget about him. Again, here it gets complicated. Bottom line is this trial, Nash gets filed out for the murders, his bodyguard, Diles gets filed out for the murders. We serve a search warrant before their arrests. A no-knock warrant, which means you can go to someone and knock their door down really early in the morning because they are either armed or they're going to dump evidence on you. So we wanted a no-knock warrant at Nash's Donald home. This is on, I believe, July 10th, which is 9 days after the murders. I'm jumping around a lot because there's no other way to do this. They kicked the door on. We used our SWAT, SEB actually, from the sheriffs because they had an existing warrant on the home, which we used, and we went along with that. So there's a shootout between the sheriffs and Greg Diles. Nobody gets hit. They just exchange shots. Everybody gets arrested. There's a guy inside by the name of Amnon Baksian, who's a reputed godfather of the Israeli mafia. He goes for a gun. When the SWAT comes through, they could have dumped him, and they didn't because he can't fire the gun. He was higher than hell, and he was a little .32 automatic. He forgot to put the magazine in the gun. It was out in his Mercedes. Why he didn't get shot, he's just lucky. We book him, Diles, a couple of girls that are in there, and Nash gets booked for the warrant. We recover guns, recover cash, all sorts of drugs. Subsequently, this leads to 2 more warrants getting served there. No-knock warrants, more drugs, more money, more guns. All these cases are building up. Finally, they unify the 3 warrants. Those are tried separately. He's tried for these things. And on the side, while we're still investigating the murders, Nash is tried for these 3 dope cases. He's convicted of those 3 dope cases. It's during this time that he comes to us during the break in court and offers my partner and I $500,000. He knows we're closing in on the murders, so we go to the DA we're working with, who's now Superior Court judge, very well-known judge. We tell him we get an offer of $500,000. Maybe we can wire ourselves and go back and say, yeah, that sounds good, and we can nail Nash for attempting to bribe officers doing their duty and all this and show how dirty he is. Then we got to thinking, he's probably a setup. If we do that and we go back and we say that, he could just turn around on us and say, what are you talking about? He's that smart. He didn't really mean this type of thing. He could set us up and then we would be screwed. Number one, that would be discoverable. Him denying on tape that he had offered us a bribe, that would be discoverable. And when he denies it on tape, that's discoverable. That goes to the defense. So you could say, and he would say, I didn't do that. That's a lie. They're trying to really get money out of me. And so they came to me. So that we forgot about that. So we dropped that. There's no reason to go to that. It would have been foolish for us to do that because he could have turned it right around and said, yeah, these cops are dirty and they actually wanted the money. Meanwhile, Nash is found guilty. He gets 8 years in prison while we're in the middle of all this other stuff. This is before the murder trials, before anything happens with the 3 murder trials. The judge turns around and changes to the 8 years in prison to time served. He lets this organized crime figure out. He's a big dope dealer in Southern California. He's involved in these murders and other crimes. Time served. He only has to do several months and he's going to be released, which has happened. Now, the side note, later on we find out this judge has been bought off by the organized crime figure for, I believe it was $50,000. He was bought off to have Nash released early. During the investigation, I have a retired LAPD cop, intelligent cop, come to me. He's retired. He comes up to the office with his little badge on, retired badge, and says, listen, I really got to talk to you about Ed Nash. He says, he's really a good guy. And this is all bullshit. He's really not involved in all this stuff. You got to know. And he puts his hand on my arm here and he says, you got to know that he supports the police. And I've known him a real long time. And you got to understand that he's not a bad guy at all. He probably didn't commit these murders. These are just a bunch of badasses anyway. He probably deserve to be dead. He just wants me to tell you that if there's anything, and again, he puts his hand on my arm, anything at all, anything. And he looks me in the eye, just let me know. Now, I'm not going to tell this cop's name, but he's a dirty, rotten SOB. He's now dead. That's the only reason now I got to tell his name. But he's a dirty cop. He was bought off by Ed Nash. And that was the second time that he tried to buy us off. You got a dirty judge, you got a dirty cop. The trial goes down. Murder trial. It's 11-1 for conviction on Ed Nash on the murders. For conviction. There's 2 jurors. The court decided to try each one separately. Nash separate from Diles. We believe Diles went there. Diles had a background with pipes and beating people with pipes. Plus, we had enough to put a case together on Diles and Nash. And there's a few things, again, it'll take forever to lay all these things out, but we had a good case on him. Both juries are hung up. The jury on Nash is 11-1 for conviction. We got 6 alternates sitting there. When one juror in any kind of a trial does not cooperate and does not deliberate the evidence, the judge can dismiss that juror for failure to deliberate with the other jury, the rest of the jury, and you can put in an alternate juror. This was a young girl from South Central LA. She was only 18 years old, 19, I think, who refused to deliberate. The judge merely has to say, are you going to deliberate or not? Because all the other jurors have come to a conclusion. You don't agree with them. That's fine. You don't have to. But you have to deliberate the evidence. She refuses. So what you can do is replace her with one of the alternates. That didn't happen. The judge let that stand and said they need a retrial, which was the wrong thing to do in my mind. This judge was not crooked, but he made a terrible decision in not putting an alternate juror on there. Because of that, Ed Nash gets released, and there's a second trial now coming up. That one juror, that one holdout, she says to the other juror, I hate cops. I don't think he did it, and I know cops are bad. Myself and my partner at the time did not want her as a juror because of a lot of eye-to-eye she did with us. We knew she was a cop hater. We ran into her. You know, when you're in a case, you can't talk with a juror. She kind of got in our way at the cash register one day, me and my partner at the time, named Mac McLean. She gave us the dirtiest look. And you get that feeling day after day, week after week, when you see somebody like we did her and the juror glaring at you. She was the one withholding. We knew that something was going on. We just didn't know what. Come to find out, she has a brother who's a gangbanger in South Central LA. The gangbanger happened to be in county jail. He happened to hook up with Greg Diles, the bodyguard of Ed Nash, in jail, which is a reason that Diles should have been a keep away. He wasn't. He was in the main group of prisoners along with this girl's brother. The guy tells him, the brother of the juror tells Greg Diles, hey, you won't believe this, but my sister is on your jury. It's on the Ed Nash jury. It's because there's 2 juries. He's on the Ed Nash jury. Maybe we can do business. So he says, well, let me see what I can do. One thing leads to another. They buy off this young juror, this young girl. Payment is made, I'm going to say $60,000 or $70,000 to the juror to hold on. The money doesn't get distributed the way that it should, and her brother ends up dead. He gets shot because the snitch that he had in county jail didn't get paid off. He got paid off, she got paid off, but the snitch didn't. And it pissed off the snitch, so he had the brother killed. This doesn't come out right away. It comes out later on. That's why, so you got a dirty juror, dirty cop, you got a dirty judge, all to be topped off by a dirty federal agent who says that we were in bed with organized crime. All this stuff goes on for months. There's another trial. He gets acquitted. So how do you go from 11-1 for conviction to 12-0 for acquittal? I don't know. Same evidence. A lot of stuff goes on. Holmes, of course, gets acquitted earlier than the other 2 murder trials. Everybody's acquitted. How do these things happen? Well, how many more people have been bought off is my simple question. We find out later on that our department initiates an internal investigation against us during our investigation because of the accusations of this federal informant. It's secret stuff. They're following us around. They're looking at our case and what we investigated. They're looking at our backgrounds. They're following us home, unbeknownst to us, my partner and I, because of this federal agent who was in charge of the ATF. It was an ATF, the Tobacco and Firearms Unit, part of the Organized Crime Strike Force. So they're thinking, well, maybe these are dirty cops. Well, they're not, because we're not dirty. With the smoke, there's fire, though, because they're meeting with organized crime people. Musso and Frank's, very famous old restaurant in Hollywood. We meet with an organized crime guy there to discuss the murder. He's a witness. We document everything. If you want to cover yourself, write it all down and keep good records. They're following us, unbeknownst to us, our own people. We're meeting with this organized crime figure, so now they say, oh, there's smoke, there's fire. Well, how else do you investigate an organized crime murder unless you talk to organized crime people? It was really dumb. Bob Sousa's brother gets implicated because he is working with organized crime people too. He just so happens he works OCID. That's Organized Crime Investigation Division. That's his job. So he gets pulled into this thing. What these investigators don't do is follow up on where he was at the time all of this was supposed to go on, where he was supposed to make a payoff. He was in Hawaii with his wife. Details. Well, Glenn was his name. He's now deceased also. Was not involved in any criminal activity at all. Neither were we. This is all BS. All of this comes to light. The problem with all of this is it's now discoverable, which meaning all of this has to be turned over to the defense, which could cause a reasonable doubt in the mind of some jurors. Our department never comes to us and says we were wrong. This pisses us off. We find out about this by accident, really, when my partner was in one night working late and finds our captain in his office and looking for our murder books, of which there are 4 volumes, and can't find them. Well, they've been confiscated by this internal investigation while they investigate us. So we are really upset. The federal agent is dirty. Everything he said is dirty. His informants are dirty. This is all discoverable. One thing leads to another. Everybody's acquitted. All these people who were dirty are still dirty. The irony is today they're all gone. They're all dead, every one of them. Are there outstanding suspects? Yeah. Will there ever be another case filed? I doubt it. The federal agent is interviewed. I'm now retired. It's, you've all heard of 9/11. Well, it's 9/10, one day before the infamous 9/11. Ed Nash has been indicted 16 federal RICO counts. One of them is being involved in setting up the Wonderland murders, being an accomplice to the Wonderland murders, and that he was part of that whole setup, which is not a murder case. He's been acquitted on the murder, so he can't be recharged on the murder. But he can be committed for being an accessory and an after the fact thing, part of it. So that's one of the 16 indictments. The others are related to narcotics. They're related to other organized crime activities and other crimes. But the most important is these 4 additional death counts that he was involved with. He shows up on 9/10, the day before 9/11. He cops out to everything on 9/10. He gets a minimal sentence of 36 months, didn't do half of that on all these charges. 9/11 goes down, and you never hear another thing about what happened on 9/10 in LA. Just the way the mop flops, I guess. I wrote another book on that, about the Wonderland murders. Malice in Wonderland, I called it, with that in 2018. Laying all this stuff out. It's very involved. It goes on for 20 years. All of these people are gone now. Just about every single one of them. All the suspects, obviously. The accomplices, all the people that became a part of this as witnesses. All of the federals. Henry Hoskins, I didn't tell you, 2009. he resigns his position with the federal government. We get attorneys. We've already got attorneys. We go after him for his accusations. Come to find out we can't sue somebody who was a federal agent who was made accusation in the course of his duty. However, 2 years later, Henry Hoskins blows his brains out, commits suicide. He's gone. Why did he do that? Did he really have a sense of caring? I don't know. I doubt it. I think he was a sociopath. I think he was dirty all along. So there's a lot of corruption in this case. It's a very interesting story. It was the most involved, screwed up, corrupted, evidence-laden case I have ever had in 22 years of working homicide. It had everything that you could imagine involved in this. And what I just said is that's the short version.